Walk the starry roads, walk among the spheres, walk the starry roads, find and face your fears. Walk the starry roads, find and claim your power. Walk the starry roads, find your place and hour. Walk the starry roads, find and know your duty. Walk the starry roads, find your soul's true beauty. Walk the starry roads, walk the starry roads, walk the starry roads.
Hey everyone, I'm Jay.
I'm Sophia.
And I'm Scott, and welcome to Witches Betwixt.
And we are here with another special guest because we're super cool and we keep attracting cool people to the Cool People Show. We are here with Ivo. And he is super cool. He has been in the witch community for a long time. He's got his hands in everything. You're really particularly well known in this kind of tri-state area where me and Scott are, in this PA, the Delmarva PA sort of kind of area is where you're at. So if you want, just maybe just a little introduction to the people. Tell us about who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. So yes, I have been at this forever. I got involved officially in the pagan community back in 1978, though I'd considered myself pagan and a witch from the early 70s on. Honestly, I tried to form my first coven when I was in high school, which was in the 70s.
Sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar for a lot of people. And had to find my own way and create my own way because I'm queer. I have a lot of unusual interests. So as a result, there wasn't anything available because of geography and because of who I was. So I and a bunch of others created our own tradition, which eventually was a coven, Keepers of the Holy Chalice, which became Assembly of the Sacred Wheel. There's now 14 covens in the tradition. And we are officially just in the Mid-Atlantic states because we chose really early on that community mattered more than anything. So that meant we had to be close enough so we actually could still interact in real space.
Mm-hmm.
I've written several books. I'm an astrologer. I helped to organize a whole lot of different magical events of one kind or another. And I manage a chance website, a pathworking website, and honestly, I could go on, but that's not what we're here for. So I think that's probably enough.
Yeah, and I'll drop links to
Sure.
all of your website and your social media and basically everything attached to your name. I'll drop all that in the show notes if anyone wants to, kind of check that out. I do love all your chants though. Like I was going through some of the chants and even your songs are nice too. I really like those too. So if you guys are looking for cool chants and the path workings are cool. The path workings are honestly, my review is they are dope. So definitely check those out. But I'll drop links to all those in the show notes. But really
Sure.
today the main topic that we really wanted to get into, and it's actually the topic that Ivo suggested, is that we really wanted to talk about inclusivity. And I feel like that is such a hot topic right now because, I mean, social media, for all of its wonderful things that it lets us do, it also really shows us like how we polarize and, pick sides and draw lines in the sand. And I think it's a really important conversation that we really need to have. So I was just curious, Ivo, did you kind of want to start us off in this conversation, or did anyone else kind of want to take the lead on this, or? Nope. Okay. So Evo.
I said I was gonna say I'll just wait for like a springboard.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's
springboard
usually how you do
Okay,
it.
okay,
jump off of.
hmm
right,
Okay.
right. I'm going to start by suggesting that inclusivity is the portal of entry word.
Mm-hmm.
When people talk about inclusivity, I view that as being like the initial step, where the first part is simply to allow people to find their way into whatever that is, whether it's a group or a tradition or a venue or a gathering or conference or whatever. But the next big step after that is not simply including people, but allowing for the opportunities for the people that you have opened the door for to then to begin to transform the tradition, the organization, the events. Because initially it's about, is this place safe? Is this going to be affirming? Is it going to do me harm? And I can tell you that the first two covens I approached, I was not allowed to join because I was gay.
Hmm.
I go by queer nowadays, but back then I was identifying as gay, and which was a bit of a shock. But beyond simply allowing people to come in, if you don't give them access to the capacity to edit, to alter, to modify the space that they've been invited into, then they remain guests rather than members of that community.
Oh,
Right.
that's a really
Right.
good thought, actually.
That's really a great way to really to kind of to kind of like set out like a like you said, like a stepping stone into this, because yeah, you can include as many people as you want into a group, coven, whatever it may be, but if you're not listening to them and taking their ideas and incorporating it into the group that you're trying to build, then what are you actually doing?
Yeah, you might be doing the equivalent of hosting a quasi interfaith event, but you're not actually recruiting people to be members of a community unless they actually get to change things once they're there.
Right.
It's kind of like having a roommate that they're your roommate, but they're not allowed to use any of the shelves or storage space. And oh, by the way, you can't change the furniture in your room.
Right. It's like you can't use any of the communal spaces, but you live here.
You can just exist in there. Exactly.
Um, so in terms of inclusivity, because I guess
Yeah.
like when you were saying like in your early days of you had petitioned, I guess, two covens, you said,
Yeah.
and really they turned you away because you were gay. I guess what year was that
that
roughly?
would have been 76 and 77.
Okay.
Technically, I tried to join a coven that I had managed to find out about. Golly, it must have been like 74. But there they had a valid, from my perspective nowadays, a valid excuse, which was, you are not old enough yet.
Mm.
And realistically, sure, if the parental units had found out about it, they would have been in trouble because I would have been a minor, corrupting minor, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it when there's a boundary around, is it safe for the group because the person is too young? But that was the first no. But the second two covens liked me enough to allow me to come to. Back then, it was pre-gatherings. There weren't public gatherings like we have nowadays, but
Right,
there
it
were
was-
things that were picnics at state parks or at city parks that were, for all intents and purposes, a pagan witchy gathering without calling it that.
Right.
And there were newsletters you could get through the mail, etc. But their issue was in their tradition that they had been sworn into, if you will, nobody had ever come up with the idea of how do you manage this. So it was very much still tied to the idea of gender polarity and really heteronormative stuff, which is it's unfortunate, because I later found out that there were other covens not that far away that would have been, oh, we don't have any problems. But there was really no way to find out except by asking. And I'm fairly much an extrovert and a pushy person in a lot of ways, or assertive, if you prefer that word.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't get hurt easily when people say no to me, or oh no, no, go find someplace else to play.
Right.
So for me, it was like fine. but I could imagine it being considerably hurtful. It didn't put me off from the community. It just made me motivated to find people that were close to home and create our own thing.
Right, because that's it's kind of crazy to me because it seems like, it seems that, our whole podcast is dedicated to this idea of queer witchcraft, so it seems like witchcraft really draws in, people who identify as queer, who are, and it seems like it naturally attracts those types of people. So it really shocked me that, like, to hear that a group of practicing witches would turn you away, because of that. It just seems so, I guess to me, it seems ridiculous at this point. I mean, but we're looking at it through a lens of, like, it was in the 70s
Time.
versus now, yeah. And it's also crazy,
Yeah.
it's not that much time in between, you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of time, but it's not a lot of time all at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, it's
But
amazing how far we've come.
But I think one of the things that I was fortunate in early on is that. So one of the things that I did back in the early '80s with my other half, Jim, is we opened a bookstore in Wilmington, Delaware, called Hen's Teeth. And Hen's Teeth was an alternative bookstore, which we didn't have any of in Delaware at the time. So Hen's Teeth was partly an occult store, partly a queer store, partly a feminist store, environmental, science fiction, fantasy. If it was an unusual niche, those were the books we carried.
Right.
And so that it was kind of like acted like a community center to a degree, but we held book studies at the store, et cetera, and eventually got enough people together to form a group. But I'll tell you that one of the things that would be harder to do in the current climate, because things have come to a boil, not to say they didn't need to come to a boil, but the boil, in this case, that coming to a boil, maybe to a boil being Lanston society. So got to mix those metaphors. But the issue at the time was trying to figure out how to make things work with people that had a lot of differences, and their only common ground was that for one reason or another they were attracted to magic or to spirits or to the dead or to the ancestors or psychism or fill in the blank. But it's almost like in the magical community there's an echo of the queer community, in that there's enough diversity so that people may only have one or two points of commonality at the beginning of their journey together. So we did a lot of exploring, and in some ways it was a little bit ahead of its time. I can tell you that in the first couple of years of that coven, one of the ways that, not all the time, but almost half the time or more, when we were setting up the roles for who would embody or enact particular beings, goddesses, gods, whatever, we did the slips of paper with the names of the beings or the roles in the ritual in the basket, and people pulled. And that meant that sometimes this cisgender, very hetero guy ended up being the goddess that night. So that from very early on, the rationale that I used to get people to sign on to that idea was, this way everyone will have cross-trained and experienced all the things.
Right.
Not to say that you might not find some things are your favorite and things that you resonate more with, but we did a lot of experimental stuff early on, and I was actually kind of happy that we were isolated in Delaware to a degree, because it meant that we were at the edges of some of the larger culture wars and witch wars of my era around what were right or not. Well, we did our own thing and it didn't matter. There was no one there to complain about us.
I love that so much, because we Scott and I, we actually a little bit ago we started up a coven, then it kind of fizzled, and we kind of want to start one up again. That's kind of like where we're at. But yeah, that was, but fortunately for us, it was like everyone in our group was pretty much queer in some capacity. But we would do those same things, like we would basically assign roles, like you would embody the goddess or the divine feminine, and and we would do that too. Yeah, and it really because it even made me realize, like, hey, there's some things that I really connect with, and there's some things that I don't connect with, and there's some things I need to work on and develop.
Yeah. I mean, for a while, when we were trying out this, working on it, building a coven, I remember, Jay, we started to have this conversation about, kind of trying to move away a little bit, maybe because we didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to talk about it any other way, but moving away from kind of this focus on fertility,
Right.
which is for a lot of queer people, it gets kind of that could be a little funny for queer people, especially when you're not cisgender or what have you, but in general, especially like fertility of like birth and things like that, that can be a little
Be a
whatever
little
for.
much.
And
Well,
mhm.
or you can reclaim it and take it on as your own. I mean, even back then and still today, we do rituals where the focus is fertility, but it doesn't mean babies necessarily.
Right.
I mean, in as a for example, I think of fertility in chants I've written, or poems I've written, or books I've written, or things I've painted, so that if you look at the world, everything that exists, everything that has been made by our hands or non-human hands of various flavors, all those things are created things, and created things are an example of fertility. I think it's for me when we give up that word, it's giving up power of a different sort. I consider myself to be, the father of 1,000 things over the course of the decades that I've done things in the community and created things. But fertility is ours as well, and it shouldn't be limited to just biological products of birth.
Absolutely. I
That's
I
really
love.
wise sentiment.
It absolutely is. And I mean, organically, I mean, I don't know if I could have said it as
Yeah.
well, but I have definitely landed on that I mean, just in the last 4 years or 5 years, whatever it's been, I've definitely landed kind of on that same, exactly what you said, just understanding the things at which I create in my life, whatever that may be, mundane or magical, what have you, that is, fertility. So I absolutely 100% agree.
And over the years, I've done lots of mothering and lots of fathering, or parenting in terms of taking care of people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we give up or cede the ground of, oh no, that belongs just to that territory over there, it makes it harder for us to ever reclaim it in a good way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think part of that is like we really get stuck in the associated images of stuff, right?
Right.
So when we say fertility, people kind of go to this immediate societal default of what that is. And there's like a lot of cis heteronormative structures around that. And for me, at least, when I think of fertility, I really think of like fertile land, like soil that is
Right.
just
Right.
wanting crops to come.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just something that's natural and ready to come about. And like,
Yep.
you describing that as like creativity and care, it just really clicks in a very organic way that like kind of speaks to me about how we can start shifting both the images that we use to present what we're talking about and like what we think of in those associations, because that's really where
Mm-hmm.
change starts to
Mm-hmm.
happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how many rituals have you been a part of? We actually did one. We have a big garden, and we start most of our plants from seed. And we charge the soil, we charge the seeds, and we plant them in the soil, and we sing to them, and etc. And honestly, the whole idea of planting seed isn't cis male if you view it as anything where you're the spark, where you're the person that places the spark where it can best grow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
A
Yeah,
word to
think of how many
somebody when
things
they
you can
need
give
it.
birth to.
Yeah. If I can tell you that writing a book is definitely got labor pains in it.
I can
Oh God, I
imagine.
bet.
I can imagine. I see. I follow like a number of like witchy writers and stuff, and when they're in their
Yeah.
book writing modes, it's the tweets are juicy. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, it's like when you're close to done with writing or doing the final edit, it's like it's kind of like if your lover's hand was nearby, you'd crush it. Like, why did you ever let me do
Oh
this?
God. God. I wonder when the water breaks with authoring, right before you're about to publish
Oh,
it.
don't talk
Everything's
about
like
water
tense.
breaking. So we have a thing about water breaking that actually the very first covenant in our tradition is the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel is keepers of the Holy Chalice, because we have that coven has this big chalice that was made out of a trunk of holly that was lathed to make this beautiful, beautiful chalice. And so that we started with that watery beginning. Every single time that we've had a new coven come into being in the assembly, somebody announces it and they have their first ritual to kick it off, there is a flood at my house.
Oh, really?
The sink it could be, sometimes it's like the sink overflows, the toilet overflows, the hose off of the back of the washing machine flies off. We've had a flood. So we joke, it's a joke and not a joke, that whenever there's going to be a new coven, the waters break at our house.
Oh God. Maybe you could get a word for that.
Right?
Words are like the witch versions of apps. There's a word for that.
Oh my gosh, that would be so. You need a word for that. Here, sign up to words.com.
Buy a word chain today. Equip all your favorite word baubles.
But is it proof of work or proof of stake?
Not sure.
I'm doing a horrible blockchain joke.
Oh, yeah, that's way above my pay grade.
Yeah,
right over my
I would
head.
say that's above my pay grade. I was like, oh, what? Oh no.
So
I understood that stuff.
Yeah, I'm a little geeky.
Trust me, we are too. But the whole cryptos blockchain thing, it just makes no sense to me. I don't understand. I cannot for the life of me wrap my head around.
People make money off of it, but
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say people make money off of it, but I am concerned. People say, "Oh, they're going to solve the problems." It's like, until they solve the problem of, maintaining Bitcoin uses as much electricity every year as the entire country of Ireland, North and South combined.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah,
just a
and they
small
keep saying
problem.
they're going to fix it. They're going to fix it. And here's the problem. Humans tend not to actually fix things when they say they're going to, so long as it remains useful and profitable.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I remember telling my mom, I'll do it in a minute.
Yeah.
So many times.
I'll do it in a minute.
5 minutes, I swear.
To kind of get us back to the kind of topic, so we were talking about fertility, and I do think that kind of really comes into this idea of, inclusivity and, creating inclusive groups, because fertility, and Scott, kind of like what you were saying, we were so uncomfortable with this idea of fertility because we hadn't explored why we were uncomfortable with fertility. We didn't ask ourselves those questions why, and we didn't really dig deep, and we didn't do that until after the coven had already kind of fizzled, right? And we realized, we were like, oh, like, maybe we could have incorporated that, because I mean a pagan sort of religion, witchy kind of group, whatever it may be, is very fertility based, in the sense of, like, we were just talking about land and growing crops and ideas and things like that. So, and I think this whole part of inclusivity is really about looking at yourself first. What boundaries are you drawing? What things are uncomfortable to you? Where do you draw your own personal lines? I feel like is the first kind of place to look, and it's hard to do that work. And I don't know, Ivo, if you can maybe like shed some light on maybe how you've done that work yourself, things that you would do to kind of work through those things.
So going to come at it from an odd starting point. Very early on, and some things have changed in the world and many things have not, or have slid backwards. But I always decided that no matter what, I was going to live as if I were free, knowing that I wasn't. So part of it is just choosing and making and kind of like catching yourself periodically. Am I living as if I had physical chains on me? Am I living within boundaries that were created by other people? Am I living as a free person or not? And that includes thoughts and actions. Like, am I going to be out in this section? Am I going to claim something that traditionally belongs to? Because here's the problem also, is that a lot of the stuff that is available was perfectly good for the people that it was designed for, because, hey, it was heteronormative because they were.
Right.
And in some regards, it's kind of like we're pioneers. We are creating and paving the way. People talk about, oh, these are the people that paved the way for paganism in the following century or decades or whatever. And I guess the thing is, it never actually stops. It's waves of change and waves of movements of differentiation. So you have to decide that you're actually in the same boat as your spiritual ancestors of 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago. You are creating a new way. You are hacking through the wilderness to find a spot to put up your home and plant your crops. You are a pioneer and you are creating. So having an attitude change about your role, so that rather than receiving everything, you're the creator. And honestly, many of the things that we ended up doing in our tradition were basically reverse engineered. We have heard it. Have you ever? I'm sure you have. I'm sure you guys have all watched Galaxy Quest.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, the old version.
And if you, and for folks who haven't, basically, aliens watch TV shows from Earth and decide that all the stuff that they saw was real, and it's kind of summed up of Star Trek, but not quite. But basically, they reverse engineer everything that they saw on the TV show and said, well, they are doing it, so there must be a way to do it. So in most of the things, you have to think about, well, they have this, or I've heard that there's this wonderful thing. I'm going to see if I can create my own version. It's kind of like knowing that something is possible is enough reason to give yourself the opportunity to create it.
Yeah.
So if
That's a really
somebody's,
good take on it.
yeah, I mean, so whatever it is, I mean, even something, for example, a lot of people I know get really bent out of shape and about things like Maiden, Mother, and Crone and Youth, Father, and Sage and stuff like that. And even that can be turned. Like, I was having a conversation with one of our covenanters a few days ago about how they needed to get more in touch with the maiden and the youth aspect. And you go, why? Well, because it has nothing to do with the human reproductive cycle or any of the roles. What I said to them was, because they were saying that that they don't have any new friends and that all their old friends have moved away, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, the part of you that knows how to make new friends and was more open to making new friends, they're probably still somewhere back in the deep parts of you that are the maiden and the youth. When you were sometime between 3 and 12, you knew how to make friends. Find it. It's still in there. Each of us contains the whole universe and all the possibilities and all the genders and also all the ages and stages of our life. So if you view things as ages and stages of life, then if I'm feeling stuck, sometimes I have to remember, what would kid me do?
I
And
like
when
that.
God, and that can be.
Yeah, and that can be powerful. But you can also imagine, what would me when I'm 70 years old think about this? But reframing it as stages of life, and you can change the names. Of course, we have the power to do that. But rather than throwing it away completely, it's like, well, how does that work for me? And then if it doesn't fit, throw it away.
I like that a lot. Right. I actually I had to for my high school final project, my right. English teacher made us do a PowerPoint presentation and a paper on the meaning of life. He made all of us write about the meaning of life. And as a young 17, 18, I was like, this is dumb. I hate this. I was right. I was very unhappy about it, because I'm like, because I also had like the intelligence at the time to be like, I'm fucking 18 years old. I don't know what the meaning of life is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm so young.
Sure.
And so what I had kind of ended up constructing as my sort of meaning of life is, the meaning of life was to try and maintain as much childlike wonder as you possibly can as you age.
That's pretty tight.
Yeah, I was pretty
Yeah,
proud of myself for that.
that's a good thing.
And I still really, I carry that with me, and that's kind of it's what made me when you mentioned, like, reconnecting with the maiden in youth, and that kind of made me think about that because as a kid, like I connected with things so quickly, and now I sometimes I just view everything through this lens of like, hold on, let me rip it apart and critique it 4 different ways before I figure out if I like it. I'm like, why am I
Right.
like this? I need to stop being like this. I need to start taking things at face value a little bit more. But sometimes it's so difficult to do that. It's so hard to let go.
Well,
Yeah.
don't
I
let
think
don't let
a
other
problem
people's go ahead. I talk too much.
I think a
Go on ahead.
problem with that, no, it's okay. A problem I have with that is I have a lot of trauma around being a child. Like, I know a lot of
Ah,
people talk really fondly of childhood, but it was not a fun time for me. And looking back on it, like, I'm scared to think about it more often than not. So,
Hmm.
like, that is something I kind of want to look at, like maybe looking into that archetype as a way to like
Maybe
step
to
into
heal
that
that
space.
trauma.
But at the same time too, it's like, oh, that's a tender wound, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it. Like
Yeah, it's
it's
deep
pretty easy
work.
to be like, I never have to look back, sort of thing, right? I think I'm
Yeah.
never gonna do that.
So memory, and so I'm going to throw something in about memories, though, and
Mhm.
the power of remembrance and the power of rewriting your own life story. Uh, so everybody's seen the Fantasia bit where Mickey Mouse and is the Sorcerer's Apprentice and chants
Ah,
the broom and the bucket and
Yeah,
everything to clean up, and it turns into
a mess.
a disaster, a huge disaster, until the wizard comes home and basically shuts it all down. So here's the problem, and interestingly enough, my early childhood was crazy because I was, born in the middle of the Cuban Revolution, and we had to come to this country, and so early is really insane. And then there's like this golden
mhm.
period, and then once I leave my tweens and start beginning to have my sexual awakenings with puberty, then it all goes into hell again because
Mm.
of anyway. But the problem, I have at this moment I have a really good memory, probably a scary good memory in some regards, because I've made a choice of always choosing to remember. And part of the problem with when I had shoved things aside is that it's almost like when you summon those buckets and mops and brooms to clean everything away and put it away. um, so once you invoke the spell of forgetting because there are things you don't want to remember, it tends to run wild on its own, and it begins to put away and make you forget things that you want to hang on to. You lose all the good memories as well as all the trauma.
Mm.
And I know a lot of people that have been through various kinds of traumatic things that in the end find that it's not just their trauma periods that are fuzzy, but they have a hard time with memory of different sort in their current life and in their later years as well. So part of it is also reclaiming the power of your total existence from the line segment that is from you when you came into being and you when you end, and everything in between, because there's a lot of power in remembrance. But um, in its own time, in its own way, my particular story around family reaction to being queer was ridiculously horrific, to the point of being held prisoner in the house for several months.
Mm.
When I had to got away from home, was homeless for 2 weeks before I found a friend from high school whose parents let me live with them. uh, got kidnapped off of the sidewalk in front of the student center at the U of D and taken away to deprogrammers for a weekend of yay conversion therapy.
Holy shit.
Fuck, I'm
So
sorry.
no. So the thing is, I've had a lot of bad stuff too, and I actually, that could be like a whole long thing. And my poor Jim, my other half, has had to endure a number of things as a result of my history, and also ongoing harassment from my parents for quite a long time.
Mhm.
But But all I'm saying is that not just the early childhood stuff. Like, I know people that are afraid of claiming the power of I'm a grown up,
Mm.
you know, or I actually know enough about something to claim, yeah, I have an opinion about that that's actually informed and you might want to hear.
I feel that whole
Yep.
being scared to claim the power of a grown up, because I still feel like that. I'm gonna be 30 soon, and I
Mhm.
still feel sometimes like I don't
Sure.
know, just like especially if someone even like a little bit older than me, or maybe just in a higher position in the company or whatever the case may be. I feel like I'm constantly 16, 17 years old sometimes. And
Mhm.
it's so hard for
Right.
me to break that. And I don't, when does that stop? What- do-
Well, it doesn't stop until you stop it, because
yeah.
I know people that are in their 40s and 50s that still feel what you're describing. And it's
Uh,
not exactly the same as calling it imposter syndrome, even
mhm.
though, I mean, that's a
Similar.
useful phrase. Similar, but not
Mhm.
exactly the same. But when you claim your totality, that you are everything from being a child to being a wise old person and everything in between, it's just that you may be in physical linear time presenting as whatever age you are, but your soul, your spirit is your whole self from start to end in this life. And from my
That's a
perspective,
trap.
you're also what you were before you were here. And if you believe in reincarnation, I
Mhm.
do, what you will be after. So that who you are in chronological time is just how you're presenting.
Hmm.
I
Actually,
gotta say, I love this because I'm in therapy from trauma in my
Yep.
past, but I'm 2 years in and everything. But a lot of what we're talking about is a lot of what I talk about in therapy. And I mean, even this idea of kind of being completely self-contained as just, who you were, who you are, who you will be, just in the moment as you are right now.
Right.
Is I mean, maybe not in so many words. Obviously, I don't know if my therapist put it exactly like that, but it is kind of the gist of it, kind of broken down. You know what I mean? That is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of what I work on is learning to, in particular, the youth, learning to kind of own my own adulthood and kind of take control and be like, when little Scotty, as we've come to call him,
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
acts out or whatever, when I trigger, I have to be accountable and I have to be there for that younger part of myself and kind of be like, no, like we're safe now because I can do this. Right. And there's a lot of, I just love how much that kind of, it was very validating, I guess. I'm sorry.
No,
No.
sorry. um, I was also thinking too when you kind of mentioned that, Scott. I was thinking when I first started taking testosterone, I literally had like a couple months of where I really actually felt like I was 16, like 15, 16 years old, because I
Oh
literally had
God.
these thoughts of like, no one understands me, you don't get
Mm-hmm.
it, like you people are all fucked, get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I went through it for a couple
Same.
months, and then I was like, I'm a whole ass adult, okay, and I need to calm down. But like I think and I really think a lot of it was just like these hormones I was just putting in my body, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? But yeah, that's also difficult to go through, like when you're going through like you're going through a whole change, a literal
Right.
change
Right.
and transition, and then they're like, well, hold on, I have a job and I'm an adult and I still have to like manage my life.
Right.
Puberty on
Mm-hmm.
hard mode.
For
If I
real.
Second playthrough puberty. Oh my God.
So I'm going to suggest a way to think about not just that kind of transition, but a bunch of other kinds.
Yeah.
Uh, Years ago, I was asked by somebody to explain, if I had to explain the whole concept of the Christian fall from grace or all that stuff, because I was on an interfaith panel, and it's
Mhm.
kind of like, well, yeah, you're asking me something I don't believe in,
Right.
but uh, the way I view the kind of things that are described with a fall or a big transition is, so all of us have had the lovely experience of installing a new operating system on our computer or on a tablet or a phone,
Mhm.
and suddenly nothing is where you want. But wait, where's that window? Where's that tab? Where's that button? Everything's in the wrong place now, and
Every
nothing
time you do an
works right.
update, everything gets fucked. Everything.
And then once you settle into the new things, it's like, oh, how could I have lived without these features or without these things being arranged this way? And whether it's a transition involving hormones and changes of that kind, or a transition involving changes of spiritual belief or practices or communities that you're involved with, anytime that we change our operating system, the user, the soul, the spirit that's living in there has to figure out where all the new things are and where the old ones have been put to. And a lot of the frustration is it's just you're reaching for things that aren't in the same place anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That actually makes a ton of sense to me, because that's pretty much how I would describe it. It really felt like I uploaded like new software into my body, and like I was just getting like acclimated to it. Is pretty much what it felt like. So yeah, I mean,
it feels clumsy because you don't know where things are.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I mean, a lot of it is storytelling.
Don't know how to fucking hit the emotional brakes sometimes.
Right. But a lot of it is, witchcraft is storytelling. So it's a question of telling you story around it, creating a story around it. And maybe one of the bits that has to be put aside, that I assume that all of us on this call probably, if we were not raised with monotheism, it was certainly around us in the culture everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the side effects of that is that there's a really deeply engraved pattern that says there's only one right story.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be some of the problem in some of the discourse in the witch community, because a lot of us come from that, right? A lot of us come from, this is the way, this is God's way, whatever. And so, and then we latch on to, this, I always use the word flavor, your flavor of witchcraft. So we latch on to the flavor of witchcraft that we like the most, that, appeals to us the most. And then we sort of like put like a stamp on it, or put like a flag and say like, well, this is the right way to do it. And we have like sometimes a tendency to do that, and then it's not it's not true though. Like, it's not factually correct because it's not the only right way.
It's also worse if it's almost your stuff. So, for example, you've seen people go crazy because somebody puts pineapple on their pizza, even though they both agree that pizza is good.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if we were, one person was talking about pizza and the other was talking about pad thai, then okay, you eat your pad thai, I'll eat this, and we don't have to worry about the fact that these things are far enough apart. The closer things are, then the more trouble. I remember a friend who's clergy of a mainstream variety said when he arranged the dinners for the interfaith stuff, he always tried to put people next that came from faiths that were as far apart as possible. Because if like you put the Lutherans and the Methodists next to each other, they would argue because their stuff is so close that it's almost the same, so it creates a horrible cognitive dissonance.
Wow, that makes so much sense. Is that why there's that makes sense.
Yes, but if you put the Buddhists next to them, they're fine.
Right, because they're like, wow, that's because they have a conversation like, wow, that's fascinating. That's so different from. Oh my gosh. Well, that just makes so much sense. You know what? That's it, guys. We cracked the code. We're ending the episode here. That's it. Twitter's canceled. So I don't know.
You fixed society.
But there's so much that's almost the same that just makes it the whole one-way story problem. And then there's enough similarity between many of the pagan paths that they go crazy because you're doing what I'm doing, but not quite. So you're almost there, but not right.
Right, but and what it really comes down to is just there's infinite ways to reach the same goal. There's infinite ways to reach the same solution or whatever it is you're trying to do through magic. And we talk about this on this podcast all the time because Sophia comes from like this, like, your origins are this with chaos magic and TKMU, and I think Sophie, you always say like your intro to magic was like psionics. And so, like, that's the
Yeah.
background that you're coming
Right,
from.
right.
And me and Scott, on the other hand, we kind of have this Wiccan trad witch sort of origin point. And it's funny because as we start to do these episodes and we're unpacking all these different things, we realize that what trad witch, like traditional witchcraft and chaos magic, how different are they really? You know, it's just like it's all energy manipulation. It's all achieving the same goal, you know?
I feel like it's branding, if I'm gonna be real fucking honest with you. Like,
Yeah,
Tradcraft really has, like, the whole, "We are an unbroken lineage," not that everybody propagates that
right.
idea, right? But it
The
really
general
does appeal
gist.
to, yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to approach, like, how
Mm-hmm.
those things kind of really appeal to people who want something older, because there's kind of a drive to wanna go for something that's older to feel more authentic, right?
Mm,
Like, it's been around longer, it's tested by time, like the people back then knew what's up. Like, there's always this looking backwards to those people
Mhm.
and wanting to get to it. But then there's like this weird parallel between that missing generation because of all the world trauma, and it's the same fucking thing in witchcraft communities as it is in queer communities. And I had that insight when you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
Evo, and I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck, like, gotta write
Yeah.
that down as a note. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's the same trauma. You have the missing AIDS generation and us not having queer elders to actually like make space for us in the world because they were just brutalized. And then you have the same thing with like witchcraft traditions. You have the same thing
Mm-hmm.
with cultural
Mm-hmm.
traditions that have been upset. Like, it's the same thing. It's the upset of lineage and
Mhm.
access
Mm-hmm.
to culture, traditions, ceremonies, and elders. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, to destroy a people, you really kind of have to go for their older community that really is going to teach the younger people, so they don't really know what to do. And that's kind of the power of making your own traditions, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
like, we
Mm-hmm.
can reconstruct a lot, and you can kind of pick it up and move it in a new direction. And that's something that always kind of spoke to me. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
our ancestors were constantly inventing stuff, you know, like when they came out with the bow, people didn't just say, "Oh, you know, I really prefer my spear. That bow is not that good." People use the fucking bow, man. Like,
uh-huh.
we adapt,
Mm-hmm.
and we constantly pick stuff up. And this is something I was saying to my friends in chat the other day. Like, a lot of spell components are really fucking old because of when those traditions were written, and they used items that were commonly on hand. Like, an iron key wouldn't be that hard to get, right? Salt would be a real common item that you need to cook and have to use it to preserve stuff, right? So people would use those things all the time in spell working. And like,
Mhm.
you kind of don't want to get stuck in worshiping the past, but you also don't want to like
Dismiss it.
yeah, and not have at least a bit of respect for it and want to learn from it too, right? Like, there's a healthy balance. And I don't know, it's just a really interesting thought I had.
That's actually kind of really what we're talking about in this episode. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
one of the other points I
Mm-hmm.
think that Evo you wanted to get into.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is so, and this is not just about inclusivity or queer stuff or anything of that nature, but just about a balance between the old and the new.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we saw as a problem when we first, uh, by the way, I mean, we still have people in our group that have been with us since the 80s.
That's
So
awesome.
it's the group is has people that have been with us for decades. But here's the thing: a lot
So
of the
that's
things that we
cool. So
loved
like within
best,
your group, you have like generations now, because like some of those have had like kids, I guess, and stuff like
but
that.
very though I will say very few of the kids choose to be witches or pagans, even though
Interesting.
some of them do. No, that's
Interesting.
actually almost universal,
Huh.
because almost all of us had something forced on us, which meant that the kids were people who had kids raised them with, if you want to do this, you can, but you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So that there wasn't that imprint. And I'm going to be real, take it however you take it. Not everybody is drawn to the woo-woo stuff.
It's
Not
true.
everybody is. I mean, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
to a degree, you can argue that if you're around it as a child, and if you haven't, but it's kind of like not everybody wants to be an artist or a musician or a
Mm-hmm.
writer or a computer geek or whatever. You have to have a calling for it
Mhm.
of a sort.
Hmm.
And sometimes you have I mean, we have a coven that has 3 generations in it, but that's an exception. Where there's a mom and a grandmom and a grandkid, they're all in it together. So, but there are handfuls of people like that. But since there's not a desire to stamp this mold on everybody, that means that they all end up being pagan friendly, and you would consider them broadly pagan or broadly witchy, but they're not necessarily practitioners. But one of the things that made it work over the years is that we do things again. Most of the covens have a pattern of X number of the holidays and moons or celebrations that year get pulled out of what was done 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And because if you do a ritual or a casting or an invocation once and only once on a spur of the moment, or write it just for that event, it never gets polished. It never gets developed in that folk process of repetition, and it becomes empowered in a different way. So we try to make sure that every group within the assembly, part of what they do every year is recycled from previous years, and part of what they do every year is written brand new just for this year. Because that's the only way you actually get to test and improve on the things you create. If it's always one-offs, then there's no chance to improve or polish or to debug.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also, by doing that, it also, I mean, yeah, like you're doing some form of repetition, but you're not making it stale because you're improving on it each time.
Yeah, it's repeated in the sense of we have this outline. This is what we did the last time. What's the delta V? What can we do better? What did we like? What didn't work? What needs changing? So it's not, and this is the old moldy Book of Shadows that we're going to read from exactly, but it's like we have a model to develop from. And that's true with techniques and methodologies for divine embodiment or different kinds of ways of charging objects or spell work or whatever. But it becomes a thing that you have both new and old, and you intentionally make the choice of which of the things next year are going to be improvement runs and which of the things are going to be fresh.
Yeah, and I think about that a lot too, especially like in my own craft, because when I was first studying, especially some of these books, some of the books that I read, I don't even know if they would even be considered like legitimate sources at this point, but just they kind of like lay it on thick, like this is a generations old tradition and and they kind of lay this on this like heritage really thick, and I sort of like got wrapped up into this idea that witches, we come from this long line of whatever, and I'm like, hold on now, like, and now, like, as an adult, and just me growing and maturing and stuff like that, I realize I'm like, it's really just about what works. It's really just about results, is what it really all kind of boils down to, is what works.
Absolutely. Though I'll say that there is a back to the claiming the power of being a pioneer and a creator. We're intentionally creating heirlooms. But there's a difference between, and I'm gonna like, I hate lore as a concept.
Okay.
So I don't care how that this is the invocation or the ritual format that you've been using for the last 120 years. Actually, the oldest tradition that I can verify to my satisfaction goes back to the 1600s, and they're still in the UK. But wow. A lot of their stuff is boring, and I mean, and may work for them because of the nostalgia factor, but it doesn't necessarily. It was never improved because it was stale. Let me give you an example of something that we hope to pass on to our spiritual descendants. So, each of the covens in our group has a ritual object that is the anchor point for the group mind of that coven, and that gets passed forever from coven to coven. There are also objects like, for example, my husband Jim has a clear quartz sphere. It's fairly big. It fills the palm of my hand. Without fail, he has done a ritual to charge that crystal with the power of the full moon every single full moon without fail for the last 39 years.
Wow.
Wow.
That will
Holy.
get that will get passed on to someone. So the things that I want to think of is whether it's a physical object or a beautifully refined ritual or song or dance cycle or drum sequence, whatever it is to make things that are beautiful and powerful. And magic does build layer upon layer, so that when it's time to pass, you have people that you then are going to hand on these beautiful things that are the heirlooms for the next generation.
I love that
Because that's the
idea.
other thing we lost. That's the other thing we lost with the breaking of continuous chains of passage. We lost not just the objects, but all the residue of power that had accumulated through practice around either particular ideas or particular objects or particular rituals.
I love that concept so much.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because like when me and Scott talk about this a lot. Scott, I think you mentioned a couple episodes ago, you're like, I'm trying to build a legacy. I'm trying to leave my legacy, I'm trying to pass it
Right.
on.
Mhm.
And we were kind of joking, like we're these big powerful witches and we're leaving this legacy. It's kind of like what we were joking about, but at the same time, I'm like, I want to leave it to someone. I want to pass it on.
So Gwendolyn Reese, who's one of our high priestesses. Oh, by the way, here's an example. I think it was about 2 years ago. It started the process, but we officially added that people that are clergy in our group get to pick what they want to call themselves, whether it's priest, priestess, priestex, or come up with another name if you like.
Awesome.
Because we have a variety of people of various flavors in our group, but one of the things that Gwendolyn, who's one of our high priestesses, gave a talk recently. She's very much into the Hellenic and the stuff, the Greek mythology, and honestly, all her past lives of note are in Greece. But she gave a talk on how what she thinks is needed now is for people to live as if they lived in a heroic song in one of the big epics. And strive to be the hero of your story. Now, but she defined hero in the old Greek way, and that is that you do something that goes above and beyond what is considered merely virtuous and good, but something that leaves an example or assistance for those that go after. And you know what? There's part of the problem with the imposter syndrome or whatever, when we think that we can't be heroic, when we think we can't make a big difference in the world, then we're screwed. There's a short story, I can't remember the author. I read way too many short stories in pulp magazines back in the day, but it's one of those mildly dystopian futures where there's a big machine where everybody takes a test and it tells you what your job should be, what you're best at. Except that the main character in the story keeps taking the test, and it keeps coming out with, oh, we don't know what you're good at, you're not good at anything, or here are a couple of secondary and tertiary things that might be good for your career path, and none of them fit, because
isn't that
what they were actually
Divergent?
Oh, that was a cheap copy of it, but in this case,
okay. So you're talking about an older story, but yeah, so it's basically like the same idea.
Except that in the short story, the deal was that what the machine said that this person was good for was to be a leader.
Oh, that's interesting.
They should be a leader, but that would have broken the need for the machine.
Right. Damn.
That sounds similar to The Giver.
And so the story I'm talking about was written probably in the late 60s.
Okay.
But so it's an old idea, but what I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong about striving to do something that will be remembered.
That made me feel so much better about, like, I guess just my own personal goals that I have, because, like, part of me is like, am I being too egotistical about what I want? Because I'm like, I want to make a ripple in the witch community. I want people to know, what we're trying to do here with the podcast. Why would I make a podcast if I didn't want anyone to listen to it and to know about it?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to create a community and bring people together, and I want to, because I've always said,
Right.
I think that in a way part of me almost wishes that I would have been content with, like, Catholicism, because I always wanted to be clergy. Like, I probably would have been a priest. I probably would have,
Oh yeah.
gone that route, because I want to
Right.
serve. I want to.
Right.
I would be totally fine with, vow of poverty. What, church pays for me to live and I get to help people? Okay, fine. Sounds like a. Wait, where do I sign?
Right.
It's just I wasn't, comfortable with the religion that, that was presented. And and witches, like, we're scattered. We're scattered in these covens. We have smaller pockets. We don't have the archdiocese behind us. We don't have this massive organization. We don't have massive, centuries of wealth behind us either. And so a lot of our stuff is so
So,
scrappy and grassroots.
but it doesn't have to be. So
Right.
here's part of here's part of the and there are good reasons why magical groups and covens or lodges or groves or whatever were scattered and separate. But when we created the assembly, we intentionally made it so that the covens are not separate. So we have 14 covens, but in order to but each of the covens are grouped in sets of 4. They're encouraged to do group rituals together. Nobody gets trained just by their own coven. Everybody gets fostered to some degree. Your training comes from multiple people within the tradition,
So
depending
you get
upon what
cross
their talents and
trained
skills
from
are.
different
You get
covens.
cross trained, and to break the pattern that often comes with training being attached to power to a degree, and there's a limit to anything. Humans are humans. But so the first and second degree in our system are granted by the coven in question you're a part of, but you're trained by several people, and they sign off. But when it's time to be clergy, which in our tradition is third, then the people that trained you up present you, all the other thirds interview you, you go away, and they discuss and they vote. But your third is not dependent upon one or two individuals' opinion of you. You're brought in by the whole community of other thirds,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
which means that you have if you get a third, that means that you've been affirmed by a majority of the other thirds of the tradition, and that you were not blocked or prevented from achieving that because one or two individuals thought you weren't ready for it or weren't capable of it. So we even designed our initiatory rituals to force interaction. So, for example, our second degree ritual has so many effing roles in it that require people that are trained that no one coven can actually pull it off. They have to invite clergy or train people or initiates from the other covens to help in the ritual.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
But the point is that people have as much sense of being part of the whole group as they are of their coven of origin. And I think that we've been able to do a couple of bigger things as a tradition, because we did not buy into we are terrorist cells and each coven has to be a freestanding separate unit without blah 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 blah. The
Mm-hmm.
problem with small groups that don't have a community attached to them is they have all the problems of a nuclear family, whereas if you add other parts of a tradition in or people in, then it's kind of like you have extended family to draw upon. So because the smaller the group of people, the more likely it is to go off the rails unless there's context of other peer groups around them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's kind of
So
like you need other
yeah.
covens to kind of keep you in check. Like, you need other people to keep you in check, make sure you're doing your thing, keep you on the, just make sure that you're not
Well, or
having a
or
ton of
or
issues.
somebody or even if it's not a ton of issues for somebody else, when you're having a moment that you can call up other people and that are in comparable roles but not in your group and say, hey, does this sound right? Am I going off the deep end?
Right, and it's also good, and if there's someone in the group that maybe you don't agree with or get along with, and you can kind of like bounce it off of someone else, just like, hey, am I being ridiculous about this, and stuff like that, which is
Right.
so. There's
Right.
14 covens in the Assembly of Sacred Wheel, and this started in what 70? No, I'm sorry.
Well,
When
no,
did
no,
the assembly start?
So it officially came into being in February of 1984.
Okay.
So we've been around like what, 37 years, 36, 37 years. Yeah, 37
Oh, and
years.
14 covens. That's awesome. That's incredible growth. That's really great. I was just looking on the website here. I was like, wow, that's so many.
But the thing is that a lot of the idea of autonomy and individuality in not just for magical practitioners, but for groups, means that you lose all the benefits of having community on a broader scale, and you get all the because when a group, like when somebody says, like, if somebody wants to learn something about runes or herbalism or whatever, you point them at the person in the other coven that knows about that, because otherwise they have something worse than imposter syndrome, pretending that you know your stuff because you don't want to be embarrassed the person you're supposed to be training.
Right. Right. That's true.
Or staying one lesson ahead of them.
Right, yeah.
Which just, breeds all kind of bad psychology and spiritual stuff.
Yeah, that's never good, especially in like a coven kind of setting. It's never good to kind of have that. I don't know. We've been going for about an hour.
Golly.
Yeah, so do we want to keep going and kind of talk more, or do we kind of want to maybe summarize and start to wrap up?
Well, I mean, we could talk a little bit more about, I know it was mentioned about how, certain prefixes of priestess, priest, that we can kind of delve into how to create more inclusive, like, coven types.
Oh, maybe like more gender
if we
inclusive
wanted to.
covens.
It was just
Yeah.
We wanted to.
I wanted to touch on inclusivity in general too, because
right,
inclusivity begs the question of who's not being included, right? And how do you open that space up to them? And I think that's definitely worthy of having its own discussion and examination.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw out one that, and by the way, our tradition is officially not oath bound.
Okay.
We think of ourselves as more open source. Nobody takes any promises to keep anything secret that we do in terms of any of our tech or rituals or magic.
I love that.
Now, there are some things that will say, if you want to learn that, you've got to come and learn it slowly, because otherwise it could blow up in your face. But that's not about secrecy; that's about safety.
Right. So that's about that's about you not hurting yourself. It's for you.
But it's. Let me give you an example of something that is part of our second degree ritual that we use it in other contexts as well. That started as a way of queering something that is infinitely powerfully associated with heteronormative Gardnerian Wicca. So you've probably seen the symbology and the ritual action of a chalice and a blade being brought together.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so each of the covens has tools, and we have interactions between the tools, and so that, for example, in the second degree ritual, the person who is getting their second degree actually holds a chalice and blade, and they themselves, with one hand holding the chalice and the other hand on the blade, bring the two together. But it's an act of trying to bring all the disparate things within themselves into unity and to create a new explosion, to become something new, to create a new self.
I like that, because then it kind of focuses on that idea of everything being unified versus seeing, your high priest and priestess just, doing that, because when you see two people do that particular, I guess, ritual act, whatever you want to call it,
symbolic great rite.
Yeah, symbolic great rite. In some way, I always find it beautiful, no matter what context of whoever's doing it. It's a beautiful, very simple thing to do. But there is definitely sort of a polarizing feeling to it, because as the cup is to the, and it's just
We don't
it's
use those words, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's just the one that I'm just most familiar with.
But
Um,
that's where we started. But we also do a
mhm,
thing where some of the covens, though each coven has all four sets of tools, is one that's sacred to that coven. Like for example, a pentacle or a wooden pentacle, and the
mhm.
staff. And we've done rituals where two covens come together, and one places their pentacle on the ground, and then the other covener from the other coven comes with their staff and places upon it, and it's basically a union of two becoming the world tree. The point
Right.
is, you can take
Ah.
any and all of the magical tools, and they can all couple to produce something new.
So the tradition, like the group of these covens is called the Assembly of the Sacred Will. Is that the
Yeah, yeah.
name of the tradition itself?
Tradition, yes.
Okay, so that is the name of the tradition. So they're one and the same. I wasn't entirely sure about that. I didn't know if like the tradition had a different name or whatever the case was.
No, but the point is, it started with the idea of, we don't like the chalice and blaze is so one note, one trick pony. So we
Hmm.
began to convert it into something that was broader and more exclusive, and actually advanced form. As you're bringing the chalice and blade together, you go beyond the dualities of night and day, et cetera, and you begin to bring three things into harmony: past, present, and future. Think of five notes in a musical chord, and how the interaction between them. Think of the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world. Anything that has a relationship with another thing can have a valence. It can have a polarity that generates power, and it's not limited to two. It could be three, it could be four, it could be five. But the more that you can bring into your mind and hold together how all these things together. I mean, hell, there's even uh, an instant polarity that every human being has between the themselves and divine beings. The small spirit is a small microcosm. The large spirit, that is a goddess or god or divine entity. We often use the term great ones
Hmm.
for as a catch-all for the big. Uh, is It's kind of like notes an octave apart or several octaves apart in some cases. So the point is, you can begin to think of all the tools of magic and all the ways in which energy is moved or shaped, because that is what valence or polarity is about. And it's not the male female binary, or any of the very. We don't want the box that only has a handful of crayons. We want all the colors.
Right, because we often talk about one side versus this side, and I feel like just as humans we just have a tendency to just go A B black white. We always kind of fall into this sort of binary sort of system in our thinking, and really it's like, well, there's a lot of space in between there. And we always talk about the idea of like sexuality being on a spectrum or gender being on a spectrum, and it's really mostly everything is on a spectrum. If I mean it really, it shifts one way, it shifts this way. It's nothing is ever really static. Everything is
Mhm.
constantly shifting and in motion. I mean, the very planet that we're on is actually in motion. So,
Contrary.
you know
Yeah, yeah. Or even beings that people refer to as goddesses, gods, great ones, divine beings of one kind or another. And what I think is bizarre is how many people choose to either view those beings as unchanging and fixed points that do not evolve. And I go, well, if you're not allowing the concept that you have for those beings to evolve, then you're saying that they have no agency.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, because then basically you're saying they're just here just to serve us, I guess, kind of in that way.
I think,
I
That
mean,
they're like
yeah.
dead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that they are somehow a closed or finished project, and
Mhm.
Mhm.
therefore not living, because everything that lives is changing.
Right. Scott, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh no, I was just what Eva was saying. I was recollecting, being a young little witch, and remembering, learning that, understanding, the divines, whatever the spirits, whatever words you want to use, kind of learning to exactly what Eva was just saying, understanding their agency and that they grow. They're not just bound to these mythologies and correspondences. You know, a lot of the time we think, like, for instance, one of the big things, a lot of younger people who may not have guidance in this stuff, they think that they can kind of just be like, oh, well, I worked a spell and I called on Aphrodite, you know, but I've never had an interaction with Aphrodite ever, you know.
Right.
And they go up to Aphrodite expecting something in return without ever having built a relationship. And it kind of, it's sort of kind of that kind of comes together with what was said. That's all. It was just me thinking, I guess.
Yeah, just thinking out loud. And it's
Mhm.
true
Yeah,
though,
it's
you see
weird.
it all the time. You see it all the time. I mean, especially I guess in like the TikTok kind of circle too, you see that too. But especially when I was learning, I guess early on in my sort of practice, basically the as I interpreted it from the various books that I had and the information that I had access to is that basically you picked a male god figure and you picked a female god figure, and they could be from different pantheons, they could be from anywhere you want, didn't matter, and as long as you connected with them, then they were your gods, and that's what you did. And I was like, and now looking back on that, I'm like, oh man, that is so wrong. That is not the way to do that.
Mhm.
But it's so important, like to note your own growth and change
That
as
that's
you're going
why
on in your
that's why I
craft.
talk about that, right? Like that's why I kind of like when I recollect things, when I think about my past, that's why I do that because it's kind of astonishing to see how much, you know, I've grown and as we talk and kind of these new ideas, you know, just kind of processing
Mhm.
the things that we're
Mhm.
talking about. Yeah.
Right, because we're talking about, this idea of old ideas and new ideas, right? So, I mean,
Exactly.
what is considered an old idea? Like, is it an idea that you had, is it something that was going on a year ago? Is it something that happened, 100 years ago?
Mhm.
And it's really this idea of constant growth and change. So this idea of everything is constantly shifting, constantly evolving, constantly just nothing is really sitting still if you really think about it. And,
Not n- not even not even the history or the knowledge that we have about them if we look at historical text or archaeology. That changes
right,
too.
we're still discovering new things about tons of different, ancient cultures, and these I've read something about Vikings recently. The hell was it? Can't remember. Basically, they found Viking remains in somewhere completely where they never found them before. And so
Mm,
that changes the
Hmm.
whole,
Hmm.
concept of what we know about the Vikings and what they were doing. And
absolutely.
so, it's really this idea of like, we really don't know what happened then. We don't know exactly what those
Right.
rituals were. We don't know what they were doing. We have an idea. They left some records. Sometimes we find old grimoires or whatever the case is, and we have some records and it's passed down. And I mean, honestly, I'm ecstatic about the record keeping abilities that we have now, that we can store so much information for future generations. And that's kind of like, it kind of comes back to my idea of like leaving a legacy. Like that's really the legacy that I'd love to leave, is just like a wealth of information that people can find and learn and feel open and accepted to kind of explore their own ideas.
And I love the idea of preserving as much knowledge as possible. And one of the biggest gifts that you can leave for future generations is your distilled, polished, refined uh, experience of working with the powers, working with the energies, working with the elements, or whatever it is that you do, because it's those unique perspectives on how to do things that have a lot more value. Uh, One of the biggest problems when you look at the old grimoires or any of the old ancient stuff that we do have that's written and lost a lot
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't written down is that there's a ton of stuff that, and it says, and then it is done in the standard practice, or they leave out all the details of the stuff that everyone knows you're supposed to do, so you don't bother to write it down.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
So the part of it is your personal is to not just collect the information, but leave behind something that says this is how I did it, so that people can actually use that starting point, in the same way that people listen to music as a way, or read tons of books as a way of developing their craft as a writer or musician or whatever it may be. The other bit is so much is lost in translation. And I'm gonna mention Gwendolyn again because I just attended her classes, and I knew this, but it just bears repeating. So Hera usually gets a really bad rap when people talk about Greek goddesses.
Mhm.
She's
Yeah,
usually perceived as
she's
being,
like vengeful, like angry at Zeus all the time, kind of thing.
or Hercules, the 12
Yeah,
labors of Hercules. Okay, well,
yeah.
let's throw in some realness that she was sharing, and that is that everybody misunderstands the story because this is also left over from our monotheistic background. These are not stories that are meant to be taken literally.
Mhm.
So the name Hercules actually in Greek is Heracles, Heracles, which actually the name translates to glory of Hera.
Huh.
And Hera was also the goddess of cycles of nature and evolution. And the 12 labors of Hercules, under her poking, is 12 initiatory challenges. She was initiating the sucker to make him demi-divine.
So it was all her manipulation and working in order to,
No. She was his high priest, basically. She was
Oh,
the one
okay.
that was actually creating the because ultimately all initiations are transformative events, and most human beings require a serious amount of destabilization to get them to whatever the next level is. So that his name and her name and the whole 12 labors were basically her paving the way for him to become a god. Those were
Huh.
12 initiations. Those were also the 12 signs of the zodiac. But so it's like a totally different perspective if you realize she's being mean because she's the one that's supposed to put him through the paces.
Huh.
Wow.
Super high intensity training.
For real.
Yeah, which is a very different perspective if you reframe it that way. But instead, you get like you get the bad Netflix Blood of Zeus things, or I mean, but I don't enjoy some of these stories. Xeno's fun, but they all miss they're very
point.
literal in how they present the myths, and very much focus on the parts that are not actually what's going on from a magical perspective or a spiritual perspective.
I think a lot of times in those myths we focus on like the action that's happening, and
Literalism.
Yeah.
yeah, like the things that are going on. Especially, you hear it a lot with like Odysseus, and his journey, and and yeah, and people really interpret that into such a literal sense. And even in school, as they we did a number of, I can't say how many units of literature English classes I've done on Greek myths and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And they really just they focus on kind of like the dumbest parts. As I'm kind of like reflecting back, I was like, I don't really care about that part. What I really care about is like, the things that were happening in between, like what is really being said here. Like the lessons that were actually learned in this. And that's not really what they taught us, unfortunately. So I guess it kind of goes back to like kind of how we were sort of fed and taught everything through sort of this monotheistic lens. It's kind of amazing how much that influences everything that we're kind of you know exposed to growing up, especially in our education.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
It
with
took me.
everything you were saying earlier. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
No, go right ahead, please.
I was just gonna say you really kind of make me feel like, oh fuck, I'm gonna be obligated almost to write a book at some point, because like if
Yay!
you don't really, like, work in a community, and even if you do, you have a lot of reasons to sit down and write some stuff, and it's like I don't necessarily want to put myself in the limelight that much, but at a certain point I would feel guilty about like just dying and not really passing all of that on in a very condensed manner, you know?
Yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
And I say
Yeah.
that too. Like I've
Yeah.
always been torn between like, would I ever write a book? I don't know, because I've said it before. Like I don't like, as of right now, I don't have any particular desire to write a book, but that could
Mhm.
change 5, 10, 15 years from now. Um,
I
Because
feel
more
like
more
that
so what I'm
changes a lot when you get a specialization. Like when you really
probably
have like something that you've been doing for a little bit that you feel you have like a chunk of theory that you really have hashed out well that you can like talk about or something along those lines. That's when you really kind of want to do something with it, right?
I guess it's like when you notice your own personal grimoire being taken up by this one particular topic, you're like, maybe I should write a book
Mhm.
about this.
Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to just do
Mm-hmm.
like a general spell book, right? Because like I've seen a lot of people in my group try and write different books, and a lot of them end up being like either very topic specific or like specific to the beings that we worked on and created, right?
Mm.
Like it's hard to sit down and do a overall theory of everything with magic or like do the 101 book without reinventing the wheel, although it kind of does eventually need to get done every so often. So that's a tough challenge, and I don't think I would be the person to reinvent like the 101 wheel sort of thing, but I could maybe contribute to like an aspect of it, you know.
Yeah, I think that is always a
So
thing.
have there's also the meta approach because you could write about your experience of or your ideas about what is it like to work with uh, a divine form, a goddess or god form that was built from scratch and then ensouled, something like happened with Zalti or Ellis or the ones in that grouping.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. And they're responsive in ways that sometimes I've found certain gods aren't. Like I was thinking earlier, what we were talking about in with rituals, and it's hard. Sometimes certain gods and goddesses seem to not be interested in you. Like I've had ones that maybe I've offended or done something wrong.
Sure.
Other ones I've like petitioned and they just are kind of like not that interested in me. But when you foster something and like make it yourself, you get this really, or at least contribute to it, in its genesis. You get this really personal relationship with it, and it's interesting, and I'm not sure if maybe that's just more my calling of where I went with stuff, but yeah, sometimes it feels like it's hard for me to reach those, older gods, you know what I mean?
Or I'm going to suggest that the tools that are readily available to reach them are the wrong ones. Uh,
Mm,
I- if you view these beings as being as real as we are and identity is a slippery thing, but have identity as real as ours, that means that they also have a lower self, a middle self, a higher self, different layers to their psychology, different layers to their energy field. And the parts that can do stuff in the world are the ones that are denser and closer to here. And a lot of times people reach for their, basically it's like you're trying to talk to the equivalent of that god or goddess's highest self when you really need their lower
mm,
self to do the job.
Huh.
mm,
That's kind of a good
Mm.
point.
Because yeah, because we end up often initially aiming for the most abstracted version of them. If you look at a lot of the older goddesses and gods, they had epithets, side names attached to them, like
Mhm.
so and
mm,
so that does this. Those were actually magic tools to get a link into the part of them that was specifically that kind of stuff and had the density to them to operate in this plane within linear time within physical space. So the idea is that the old tech was that you had very specific, clear keys for anchoring onto the portion of them that was small enough to come into our time and frame. And a lot of times, people, the standard books and standard teaching, you're basically not going to get the attention of the big ones. I'm going to compare it to this. When you're going for their big name and their most expansive, inclusive version, it's like trying to manage the big helium balloons in the Macy's Day Thanksgiving parade with 3 people.
Right.
It takes this large group of people, like a whole temple full of people with enough anchoring tethers to tether that big a thing into linear time and space. But if you're just asking for so and so the opener of ways to show up, then that small piece of them can slip into our realm. The ones that we create from scratch, we basically have already built their close to Earth interface.
Huh.
Oh, No, that makes so much fucking sense because, like, when you're building a god, a lot of the times you're tapping into archetypes that are like super old, right? Like, even if I'm
Right.
making a sailor god, I didn't invent the archetype of sailor. That's something that's like way back there. But what
Right.
I have built is a personalized interface, which would be like that lower form, that direct connection to it, and it's kind of a way to touch into that. And if you get multiple people together, you could reel in something a lot bigger
Right.
and actually cast it. I totally get what you're saying. That is a very good insight.
Um, so it's coming
one
up.
of the reasons why. Sorry, I
No,
was going to
go.
say real fast. It's one of the reasons some traditions have goddess or god names that are just theirs that are not public, because they built those little landing pads or connection interfaces for that version of fill in the blank.
Huh.
Oh, you're giving me some ideas. Thank you. I'm
So
gonna
That's the
write some
plan.
shit down.
Sophia's gonna be cracking open the book and scribbling away.
Hmm.
Or is this more of like a Google Docs scenario? I'm not sure.
No, well, it'll go to Google
Yeah.
Docs eventually. It's gonna be paper, so don't forget it right now.
I feel that. I know sometimes I'm like how much time do I need to invest in this idea? Is this a Google Doc idea or is this like a write it down idea? Which one is it? But I was gonna say we're coming up on an hour and a half. It's coming up on 9 o'clock. So do we kind of want to sort of like I guess come up with some like our concluding statements? You know, kind of like summarize everything that we're kind of talking about today. You know, I mean, for me, I really enjoyed having you here on the show, Ivo, and really because I mean, we are a queer witchcraft podcast. It's in our title, it's in the branding, it's in everything that we do, and we often say in here, you know, we joke, you know, as us all in our 30s and approaching our 30s. You know, sometimes we're seen as like elder queers in the community, and you know, for you being older than us, like it's we're getting knowledge and insight from you, and it's just amazing to have that kind of energy here in the podcast.
For clarity's sake, I'm 62.
There you go. You know, there's like basically a 30-year gap. So yeah, it works out. It's pretty even and on point there. So yeah, I mean, that's what I just wanted to say. And really, you have this way of just like really I guess summarizing these ways in a really succinct way, and I guess that's why you're a writer, and I guess that's why you got books out, because you're able to do that. And you know, it's a really good skill and talent to have. And I would love to have you back on the show for a bazillion other topics, because I'm sure we could talk for years about a million other topics in this wheelhouse. But in terms of the topic of today, did you want to kind of lead us out with any kind of like concluding statements or sentiments or anything like that?
I think the biggest thing is we all have the power to create the world and the magical traditions that we want and that we need and that we deserve. And we often forget that we actually have the power to do so.
I like that. I like that a lot. Because that's actually really kind of it's actually really kind of in line with like DKMU and chaos magic kind of stuff that I've been reading too. You know, you have the power to control your own reality.
And that leads into what I was going to say is you have the power to make your own traditions and come up with stuff and have your own personal paradigm, even if you don't necessarily have the kind of personality or even drive to join like a coven or a group. You can make your own system and it can really be intense and really work and be wonderful too. And you don't have to force yourself into any place that you don't fit, you know? So if there's a tradition that works great for you, like don't feel like you gotta make your own, but don't feel like you gotta stay somewhere you don't belong, because sometimes that's just your calling to make something, you know?
Feel that. How about you, Scott? Any kind of concluding sentiments that you wanted to kind of lead out on?
Not to gush over Ivo too much, but I just want to say it's been an absolute honor to have a conversation with you. I've been reading about your work and reading your work since I was 12 years old in high school. In high school.
Wow, I didn't know that actually.
Lab, like in between, because I used to work in the school library in high school, and I would be like, getting people's books out, and in between, like, looking up you and Lori Cabot and, people that were. So it's been absolutely amazing having this conversation. I hope you do come back at some point to, that we can pick your brain about more things. It's been an absolute honor to have you on.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, it's been cool too, because Evo also runs Delmarva Pagan Pride. Or you're still with Delmarva, right? Pagan Pride? You still help run that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the
last 18 years.
Yeah, and one of the first and last messages I sent to Evo before he reached out to us about being on the podcast was about portable toilets for the event. So
Yeah. It's practical.
It is.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Evo, it's been great. We want to have you back on for a bazillion more episodes. But for now, we're gonna cut it here. And thank you everyone for listening and hanging out with us today. And we will see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Road weary and alone, I parked beneath a rowan tree to walk, to stretch, to watch the moon's rising. My lady moon, clothed in veils of woven cloud, her light lay like a sword upon the waters, and the stars hung from the trees like radiant fruit. The grasses were green flames dancing with the swaying breeze, while the wild rose sang with fragrant cadence. And then I heard the screech of wheels, parting worlds that once were one. Ripples from road-tossed gravel scattered the sword of light, but headlights caught a fleeting form, and so I knew, though I could not take up the sword, nor pluck a starry fruit, I knew at least there were elves. My lady moon, clothed in veils of woven cloud, her light lay like a sword upon the water.